Welcome into the American Studios. I'm Morgan Uber. In October of 2021, the American announced the addition of 6 new schools, and now the time has finally come to welcome UAB, Charlotte, Florida Atlantic, North Texas, Rice, and UTSA to the American. And while there will be new brands, new teams, new coaches, and student athletes, the conference is continuing to power forward with its same mission and commitment. And joining me here today to discuss all of that and so much more is Commissioner Mike Aresco. Commissioner, first off, thank you so much for the time. And here we are 10 years later since the launch of the American in a similar situation. There were a lot of questions and doubts about the potential of this league, and now with these 6 new members, 6 new schools, plus the addition of the current members, why do you believe that they will continue to exceed the expectations for success here in this conference?
Well, thanks for having me, Morgan. It's interesting. It seems those 10 years seem to have flown by, but it also seems like back then it was almost a different world that we lived in, in terms of the way competition was structured, the way conferences were structured. It's quite different now, and I think we'll be as successful. In fact, I know we will be. I think we could potentially be more successful. But there are new challenges that didn't exist back then. Back then we were given up for dead. I mean, we were in disarray. Anybody who was around then, and very few people from our conference really were, but from the original group, we had no name, no logo. After we finished that negotiation with the Catholic 7 who left the conference, and we had had other defections prior to that, we had no name, no logo. We had no Madison Square Garden anymore. We didn't have a TV deal. We had nothing, and we had to start from scratch. But the one thing, we had a few things going for us that no one realized at the time. One, you still had the year in residency for transfers, so you didn't have that kind of volatile movement. And if you were intelligently recruiting and you were developing players, you could keep them. And there wasn't going to be any issue. You could build your teams, and you could develop great players, and they wouldn't just, up and leave. And then second, we had scholarship limits still in place, right? So that helped. And there were some other things that we also had that I think really helped us. There was a lot of cohesion in the conference. We also had a great group of coaches who hadn't really made their mark yet. Okay. And now, to your question now, with the new schools, these are good schools, and they are schools that are willing to invest. We took, I think, the best schools out there who fit our culture, who were making the commitment, who already had established programs. Football drove it, no question. On the other hand, lately people have been joking that we're a basketball conference because of the success of Florida Atlantic, the success of North Texas, the success of UAB, and some of the others in basketball, which we didn't really expect. But football tends to drive, as you know, conference realignment. But the challenges now will be different. We don't have the year in residency anymore. We have the transfer portal, which is, and also the other thing I didn't mention, you didn't have NIL back then either. And NIL, together with the year in residency going away, has created a perfect storm. And to me, a lot of the wrong incentives, a lot of problems. I don't think college sports is, in many ways in a particularly good place. I think it's always been popular. I don't think that in the end it will lack popularity, but I do see some real issues. So we're going to have to deal with that year in residency business going away, which means, we've just lost some key players to the so-called P5 conferences that have a lot of money and they have certain other things. But on the other hand, I believe that our coaches are committed to developing a culture where they keep players. I think they're also committed to recruiting intelligently, using the transfer portal also. It works both ways. And so I think in the end we have to wait to see how things shake out. NIL, our schools are developing NIL programs. Again, we probably don't have the resources that some of the other schools have that we've been competing against, but we have a couple of other things that I'm very, bullish about. One, we're in the right regions. You want to be in Texas, you want to be in Alabama, you want to be in Florida, you want to be in Oklahoma, you want to be in all these places where, and Memphis is at a crossroads of all the areas that are hotbeds of college football. And we also have really good college basketball. We're going to be deeper, even though we lose Houston and Kelvin Sampson, and they've done a wonderful job. So in the end, I think that's going to help us. I also think the transfer portal could be utilized to help us because we're in areas where kids may want to come home, and I think that's really important. And also the demographics help us because I think there are more players in our area. In addition, we have ESPN, just like we did back then. And that's the other thing that we had going for us, that we didn't have much money, and our TV deal wasn't lucrative. We finally did a much better one 6 years later, which is now the most lucrative outside of the so-called P5, which is, a term I don't like, but you still have to use it occasionally to identify those schools. The point is, we, at the time, we had ESPN's exposure, and that really helped build our conference because when we achieved something, people saw it. Mm-hmm. People saw national TV. We had ABC appearances. We had ESPN. We had ESPN2, ESPNU. We've still got that. And these new schools will really benefit from that because before they just weren't getting a lot of exposure where they were. And if they succeed and they have good seasons, and I think, they will, then they'll get that kind of exposure. So, I'm optimistic. I could say guardedly optimistic, but, you have to be realistic, and we always have been in this conference. We know where we are in the pecking order of conferences. We know some of the headwinds we face up and down the line. But I think in the end, we're going to be a very, very competitive conference, just like we've been. And I would hope that we just continue to build on what we did the last 10 years. That gave us, you look where we were 10 years ago, as I mentioned, and we had to kind of pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. Now we're already established, we're nationally relevant, but we are facing a new set of challenges.
You mentioned markets and culture, and with these membership changes, what developments do you expect to see in terms of the identity, the brand, the vision of the American here moving forward for the next 10 years and beyond? Yeah,
that's a great question because the brand, I think, over the last 10 years was we were a challenger. We were challenging the powers, that be. We were trying to delight our fans with overachievement, doing things that no one expected us to be able to do. And we also had, the ability, I think, over the last 10 years to play the teams we needed to play so we could be competitive against all the top teams. Those things were really, very valuable for us. I think now, the brand, as you know, we started the P6 campaign a few years after we reinvented our conference. I think that was an important move. Mm-hmm. And I think it differentiated us in a way that was justified because of our achievement. Morgan, if we hadn't achieved what we did, it would have been hard to do that kind of branding, and it would have been hard. You wouldn't have been taken seriously if you promoted the conference. But we had something to promote. And therefore, the P6 campaign made it clear that we were the sixth. And in every metric, we were. And 8 out of 10 New Year's Day appearances, including one playoff appearance, which no one ever thought would happen in our conference because we were a so-called G5, right? And, we could have had 3 or 4 playoff teams, as you know. But, I wrote a letter recently regarding the notion that we should do away with P5 and G5. We certainly want to do away with G5 for sure because we don't want to be called G5, but it's better to do away with P5 too. I'm not even sure there is a P5 anymore. So what will our branding be going forward? It'll be power. It'll be elite conference status, that we're one of 10 FBS conferences. They should all be treated equally to begin with, but as you know, not all conferences are created equal. And so some are going to be better than others. If you really want to use the P business, P2 is probably what it really is now with the SEC and the Big Ten gobbling up all the marquee brands except for just a few, right? They've really consolidated all those, and they're both going to be powerful 16-team conferences. We don't know what the status of the Pac-12 is. I don't get into the business of other conferences, but that's going to bear watching. We know what the ACC is right now. We know what the Big 12 is. We are right there competing. The issue for us is going to be to maintain that power status while trying to wean people off the P5 business and you know, the G5, P5. And one of the reasons is, and my letter was speaking as much to the media as anyone else, the media tends to write articles and focus on P5. And I was noticing that more and more and more. Focus on the 10 FBS conferences. I started to see it a little bit. I saw somebody refer to P5, but then said, well, if you look at all 10 FBS conferences as well. And that doesn't mean that we're equal to the other so-called G4, you know, the other 4 FBS conferences that have been kind of lumped with us. We have separated ourselves, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't have an opportunity too. You know, it doesn't, you know, it just means that you're labeled based on what you've accomplished. And incidentally, you know, the other thing about the P5 is there's autonomy, and that's an inside baseball thing. You know, it's an NCAA legislative thing. Those 5 conferences have the ability to pass certain kinds of legislation. They have more money than we do. Okay, fine. They have more resources. But competitively on the field and on the court, we've done as well, even better in many cases. Therefore, when I hear power, that doesn't reflect competitiveness, right? When you say, well, a non-power team just won the national championship like UConn did in our conference. You know, or a non-power team just made the playoff. You know, one of 4 teams out of 130 playing college football. They're non-power. Morgan, how ridiculous is that, right? And so I'm trying to get rid of that. So our branding going forward is going to be as a powerful conference. We're going to get rid of P6 right now because we don't even believe there's a P5. And you know, by the way, as good a claim as we had to really be a P6, it can't get traction in this particular situation because this group of conferences, and their names I could use to describe what they are, but the point is there's no way in and no way out. Think about that. You know, we've been knocking at the door but have not gotten any real traction with that. So why continue to use P6 when we're not even sure there are 5, right? And down the road, if they continue to use P5 or it becomes P4, we can always pivot if we have to, but why not focus and see what we can do with the idea that it's a group of power conferences. We're one of them. And, you know, I talked to a commissioner from the P5 who said to me, well, you know, I think you make a lot of sense. You know, let's get rid of it. And I just want my conference to be elite. I want my conference to be powerful. That's where we're going with that.
You've mentioned, you know, all the accomplishments of this conference, the national championships, the college football playoff team. With that, in celebrating the 10-year anniversary over the course of this next academic year, how do you look back at the past and really plan to use the past 10 years as a roadmap for the future in potential here at the American?
Yeah, another really great question. You know, it's funny, when you're driving a car, you can't be looking just in the rear view mirror or you'll crash, you know, or you'll go off the rails, right? And so you want to be able to look in the rear view mirror to show what you've done, but keep your eye on the future, you know, and use the past to build your future, right? And that's what we're going to do. We've had a great 10 years. We need in the next few weeks, you know, in July and August as we get toward football season, to talk about that, to build on that, to say, look what this conference has done. Look where we are in the constellation of things. We never thought we'd be here, but we've done it, and we've done it the right way. You know, we've done it with a lot of good things academically, you know, in terms of compliance, in terms of other things. And, you know, knock on wood, we've had a good run in that regard. But we've been incredibly successful, competitive. And now let's look ahead, though, and say, okay, because of that, we have 6 schools that wanted to join us, right? And by the way, we were a victim of our own success in losing 3 schools, you know, Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF, that have made a lot of contributions. And I say farewell in the spirit of friendship. They were great members of our conference, helped build the foundation of this conference. Their achievements will always be a legacy that this conference will have. But now it's time to look ahead and see that the new schools will add energy. They're coming in to a foundation that's already now been built. Now the question is, can we keep it going, and can we, you know, improve on it? So I think we're in quite a different, you know, place, you know, in that regard.
Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and really looking forward and excited about the present and future for the conference.
Well, thank you, Morgan. I am too. You know, I'm excited to welcome the new schools in. It's a little bittersweet to say goodbye to the 3, but again, as I said, it's all positive because we've got a conference now that is among the leaders in college sports. I think we'll stay there. And thanks for having me. I always enjoy talking about the conference and where we're going. Thank you.
And for more on the 6 new schools, be sure to follow us on social media at American_Conf and visit our website, theamerican.org.